Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here for our webinar on teaching students to be critical thinkers and change agents with ArcGIS. We are so glad to have Dr. Joseph Kerski, who is the education manager for ESRI, which is the software, the company that makes the ArcGIS software, where he has served for 21 years as a geographer at the U.S. Geological Survey and at the U.S. Census Bureau. He is taught as adjunct instructor of GIS in traditional and online settings at Cinti Gleska University on the Rosebud Sioux Reservation and at other universities. He holds a doctorate, master's, and bachelor's degrees in geography. He seeks out and fosters educational partnerships, creates curricular materials focused on spatial thinking and geotechnologies in education, conducts research in the effectiveness and implementation of these technologies in education, and teaches classes and workshops in geotechnologies and in spatial thinking. So all in all, Dr. Kerski is a rock star. Welcome so much, Dr. Kerski.
Oh, many thanks, Lori. Folks, I've been looking forward to this for quite a few weeks, as Lori and I have been discussing. And I've also been to your part of the world numerous times in the past on work trips. And Lori and I have been discussing about sometime in the near future having me come down there from Denver. It's a short flight, and I love the DFW area. And in particular, I salute the vision that you folks have charted for many years. I've been to many institutions in your area, UTA, the Brookhaven campus at the university, in your the Dallas College system. I've been to SMU. I've been to some schools in your area. Great place to be doing anything with spatial thinking and geotechnologies. But I know some of your students and faculty maybe have background in other places, or they're seeking to go to other places. And the nice thing about geotechnologies and spatial thinking, and it's going to be relevant as we'll talk about in the next 3 hours. Just kidding, we don't have 3 hours. Just wanted to make sure you folks were on your toes. Why this actually matters in government, nonprofits, industry, academia, and beyond. So you're going to be a valued employee no matter where you go, as we'll talk about, in the world, and in no matter what discipline you go into. And that's why I'm going to ask you to think about some things that are kind of deep thoughts for a Tuesday midday. But what do you want to see in society? What are your goals for our society or global society as a whole? I would just submit to you all that we all want to see in some facets a more resilient, more equitable, more sustainable, healthier, happier world, right? And that, to me, is why we do geotechnologies, why we are enthused about and do all that we can to support, in other words, my team and I in collaboration with all of you, spatial thinking and the application of geographic thought through geotechnologies in a wide variety of disciplines. That's why we do it. Oftentimes, as a geographer and someone on our education team, which by the way serves universities, community colleges, technical, tribal colleges, libraries, museums, and K through 12 schools, we support all of those institutions wanting to embrace some aspect of using geotechnologies to build this better, more sustainable world. But oftentimes in that role, I'll get people saying, hey, Joseph, I've got my data on the map in ArcGIS Pro, ArcGIS Online, or some other tool. And I'll say, hey, that's great. And? Why do I say and? Because the map is not the end goal. Maybe you didn't expect me to say that today, and maybe you're going to be tweeting about, Joseph said the map is not the end goal. Well, that's exactly right. When you think about it, we all want to learn more geotechnologies because we know that they're going to be tools for making wiser, smarter decisions. And so in conjunction with that, we need to learn how do I map a spreadsheet of data? How do I get data in different map projections to align? How do I route vehicles through a city like Dallas? How do I make choropleth maps? How do I classify data? How do I make web mapping applications like dashboards and story maps that I've seen just about on a daily basis for the last several years? How do I do all that? So sure, learning some geotechnology skills is important, but they're a means to an end. The end goal is to understand something better in a deeper, richer way through geotechnologies. Does that make sense? yes, you will be able to get a job having geotechnologies on your tool belt in conjunction with this tool right here, which is the most important tool of all, your brain. The geocoding and the near tool and the geo registration tool, I mean, those are all, again, tools. The technology will evolve. Keep this tool at the forefront, your brain. Keep that learning and growing and moving forward. More about how to do that in this presentation. But the goal is not just to map things. The goal is to understand something. And then I would just encourage you also gaining knowledge and helping your colleagues develop skills and so on. I know some of you are instructors, helping students use these tools. But remember, another aspect of this is to encourage people to actually take action on some issue or problem or situation in your community, in your metroplex, in Texas and beyond, in the world. Okay, so the whole idea is, you're asking a geographic related question, you're gathering data. It's the scientific inquiry method or the geographic inquiry method, which is a modification of the scientific inquiry method. Then you're analyzing the data, you're mapping, you're analyzing. Okay, but then you're sharing that information so that other people can use that information to care and maybe take action on equity, on the urban greenway, on invasive species, on soil chemistry, on water, all the UN Sustainable Development Goals, right? I mean, all of those things. We want people to understand those things in a deeper, richer way to take action on it. And certainly through you sharing story maps, dashboards, infographics, and other things, other visualization tools that you have access to at your fingertips nowadays, that's great. You can actually help people to care and to do that. Certainly nothing wrong with publishing in academic journals and books and chapters. I mean, I've done that. Many of you have done that, etc. Nothing wrong with that, and I still continue to do that and encourage other people to do that. But with these tools at your fingertips, you also have the capability of sharing this to many more people in a wider diversity of disciplines and backgrounds. So when we think about what we want to see in society, I would submit to you all a couple things. Education is going to continue to change, right? It's going to remain in a modified form. Now, education was undergoing lots of change even before COVID, right? But you all are right in the middle of hybrid, online, face-to-face, and thinking about how can we be viable into the 2030s and beyond in our educational institution, in the Dallas College system and maybe other institutions that you all represent. But the point is, how do we structure education so that it's going to be a meaningful experience for students and give them really good technical skills, sure, but also life skills, which is, I think, one of the things that geotechnology actually offers in an educational setting, which we'll talk about today. And secondly, geotechnologies is going to continue to evolve. In the not too distant past, and maybe some of you, I know Professor Bartz and some others have been around as long as I have, but the point is that some of you have been around in the old clunky days of GIS when it was just on desktop computers. It was very difficult to share data, very difficult to do any sort of 3D visualizations or analysis. You just didn't have enough RAM. You didn't have enough capacity to store data. I'm not going to say that all those technical barriers are shattered or non-existent, because there's still technical barriers, right? We all know that there's inequities in bandwidth capabilities in different parts of the world and even in our own states and country, right? So when you probably can relate, we sent a bunch of UC San Diego students home, 2 years ago, and they were data science, data analytics students. We had them going through this capstone project, and when they got to their home offices, and some were in China, and other places around the world, they didn't have the kind of bandwidth that they had at UCSD, so we had to modify our lessons. Okay, let's reduce the number of variables, let's reduce the number of tessellations that we had the students analyze, and so on. And that was hard for us and for them. I mean, they were data science students. They were all about, more data is better. But, we had to think about, and I'm sure you do as instructors, how can we structure these lessons so they're still meaningful, but they're not taking up large amounts of processing power and hours where the students can't get a meaningful result. So the geotechnology tools have evolved from this sort of niche technology that in the not too distant past was, here's a whole bunch of manuals, and And now you go learn GIS and you put your regular career as a landscape architect or a city planner or a health official or a social worker on hold while you learn GIS. I mean, exaggerating here a little bit just to make a point, but the point is it was a niche technology that was very long in terms of the process to actually learn it. Now, I'm not going to say that geotechnologies is click, 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 finish, and all my problems are solved. We don't want it to be that. It's still a complex, dynamic planet, right? We've got this oblate spheroid. It's wider around the equator than it is around the pole. So we have map projection issues right from the start. We have data that has gaps, that has certain mapping spatial tolerances. We're trying to model this three-dimensional Earth on a two-dimensional or a three-dimensional map or a computer screen. And so we've got all kinds of distortion. All map projections, for example, are SAD, spatial relationships, shape, area, distance, and direction. Some of those have to be sacrificed. Usually one or more of these have to be sacrificed. Shape, area, distance, and direction. Anyway, the point is we've got all kinds of inherent distortions and gaps in spatial data that gets into a geographic information system. Maps are still very useful, but they are representations of reality. They are not reality, and so you need to deal with uncertainties in data, and we'll talk about that here in the next moments as well. So all of these things are rapidly advancing. How do you, how do I, how do others embrace these tools to build this more resilient, vibrant future going forward? Now, I wanted to share my contact information for those of you that are thinking about the following, and I hope all of you are. Building your professional network, especially you students out there. I encourage you, while you're still undergraduates even, to build your professional network. Why? Because there's two reasons. One, you're going to work on multidisciplinary projects with GIS. You're going to be working with people from a wide variety of different disciplinary backgrounds. And number two, you'll find that the geotechnology community, the network of geotechnology enthusiasts, is a very, well, they care about two things. They care about the planet, and they care about its people. So you'll find, I think, that they're a very nurturing kind of geo-mentoring community where they want to share data, they want to mentor, they gain a lot in return. I gain a lot from working with students and faculty and deans and others. I learn a lot from them, even though I've been in geotechnology, for 40 years. The point is, I think those are the two main reasons. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, etc. I'm rather passionate about all this. On my Our Earth YouTube channel, I have 5,000 videos. So I'm rather passionate about all this, okay? And I hope it shows, and I hope that you'll consider me a trusted colleague as well as my teammates on the ESRI education team to help you fulfill your goals and to meet your objectives going forward. Also, I wanted to share my own background with you, not to bore you to tears, okay? But to encourage you in two ways. First of all, as Lori very graciously mentioned, I have toes in 4 different waters of society. Nonprofits, so I was president of the National Council for Geography Education. I love geography education. I teach in different contexts, in different universities, tribal and technical and community colleges, as well as universities, mostly online because of my work travel schedule. In the past, I've worked for these major federal agencies, science and mapping agencies that you see here. And I work for ESRI, as Lori mentioned, Environmental Systems Research Institute. And our mission at ESRI since 1969 has been about 3 things: education, sustainability, and science. That has been our core mission for those many years, for over 50 years. Why? Because we really believe that applying geotechnologies and the geographic perspectives help us solve perplexing, complex problems that increasingly affect our everyday lives. What are those problems, Joseph? Hey, everything's good. You could put it in the chat box if you want, what kinds of things you're concerned about, but think about the perplexing, complex issues of our world: climate, inequities, social, economic, etc. inequities, water availability and quality, health. I think before 2020, people wondered, why does ESRI have a health team? I don't think they wonder about that anymore, right? There's so many evidences over the past 2 years and even before that, but that geography and health are linked. And by looking at things in a spatial context, we can maybe solve and at least mitigate some of these health issues that we're facing and that we will face in the future. But in other words, biodiversity loss, ocean acidification, natural hazards, building resiliency in communities, I mean, the list goes on. Energy. I mean, think about last February in Texas and all the power issues that were happening down in your part of the world. The point is, all of these things are spatial, and they can be at least grappled with and understood and solved through the application of spatial thinking and geotechnologies. So I'm sharing my own background with you to encourage you in two ways. Number one, that you can have value to organizations in different sectors of society. And number two, I'm hoping that this encourages you that you're not stuck in one organization for the rest of your career. You can move around, as I have. And no matter where you move around, again, these perspectives, skills, and abilities and content knowledge will help you be valuable in your organization. Let's say you're passionate about the environment. Hopefully everybody is. But being enthused about the environment is not going to get you a job at Texas DNR or the EPA or United Nations Environment Program, right? It's being able to apply some of these tools through geotechnologies and other tools as well, but being able to apply what you're passionate about to bring value to that organization. Because chances are you're going to be working for an organization, right, folks? Yes, there are independent consultants in geotechnologies. In my own neighborhood here in Colorado, I know one of my colleagues is an independent consultant. Okay, so they do exist, but chances are you're going to be working for a government agency, an academic organization, a private company, or a nonprofit, and you're going to be asked, what are you going to contribute to this organization? So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to encourage you in these two ways, that you can change and also be valuable to different sectors of society. Okay, so since we're all about space and place here, I mentioned that I'm not too far away from you, off to the northwest, across that panhandle of Oklahoma, and then, in southeast Colorado, and then out to the Front Range. I'm actually on the edge of two major ecoregions, the Shortgrass Great Plains ecoregion and the Rocky Mountain Front Range. And I selected this photo. Think about what would be your photo that it would indicate this is the quintessential photograph of my own region, wherever you happen to be. I know many of you are in the DFW area, but wherever you happen to be. This is one I've selected because just like your area, it's got a lot of population pressure. People want to move there for a lot of economic reasons, but also to go hiking, explore the great outdoors, etc. And also I selected this. I'm on my bicycle. You can see people on horseback. But the climate and weather. So this is in the winter, but pretty nice weather, wearing a light coat, and I've got that bank cloud, that lee side of the Rocky Mountains lenticularis cloud. When it sits up there in the winter for several days, it'll just sit up there with the waves going over the mountains like this, and the descending. We've got that clear air band, and then it ascends again because it's on this trough, and then the crest of the wave. The crest is the air rises and it condenses, but that's not a rain cloud. It just sits up there because it's condensed. So it's a cloud, but the point is that is a sign of fair weather here in Denver for much of the year, October through April. We get that lenticularis cloud just sitting there. Makes for nice sunsets too. Another thing that I wanted to encourage you to do is think about things that you did as a kid that maybe nobody else liked to do. Embrace those things. Maybe it's something you like to do as an adult, and nobody else in your circle of friends or family likes to do those things. That's okay. Embrace those. Make them a part of your own journey. We all have our own journey, our own unique things to contribute to an organization. In my case, as a kid, I took pictures of landscapes. There are very few people in my pictures. Not that I was antisocial or anything, but the point is, it was all canyons, mountains. I grew up in western Colorado. Cityscapes. I'd get to the certain point of a building where I could get that certain angle, so I'd knock on office doors as a 12-year-old saying, hey, can I take a picture out your window? I also drew maps when I was a kid on big pieces of poster board. I had all my maps labeled with streets and estuaries and railroad yards and freeways and contour lines, mountains. I even had address ranges in the margin of my maps. Look at this. The 3500 North Block, the 4200 North Block is 7 blocks north of the 3500 North Block. What kid cares about address ranges? This is the point I'm making here is take something that you uniquely love to do, that you're passionate about, and make that part of your story and see if you can weave that into part of your job. But I truly believe, folks, with my own heart of hearts here, that geotechnologies is not just a meaningful career path. It's not just a good skill to have as you go into the workplace and even at Dallas College, but it is absolutely essential for solving these perplexing issues on our planet. And so why this all matters, as I mentioned, as you folks are acutely aware, we are confronted with very serious issues. And we've got to, some of these variables are going in the wrong direction, aren't they, folks? Ocean acidification, biodiversity loss, urban sprawl, et cetera. I mean, we've got some variables that are clearly going in the wrong direction. How do we reverse those trends? And we are living, as I hope this graphic kind of illustrates, in amazing times. We've got data and methodologies and tools at our fingertips, and GIS in the cloud is a huge leap forward, and we'll talk about that as well. We've never been so empowered as today, but we've also never been so challenged, right? Especially in the last 2 years, we've realized with natural hazards and COVID and other health issues that, hey, we've got some vulnerabilities. How do we get past those? How do we solve those things? So one of the things that I wanted to say is that we need to bring together a diversity of people, and that's why I'm so glad to be working with you all at Dallas College, because you really get this. In my work with universities and colleges and schools, not everybody understands this. They think, oh, geotechnologies, that should be over in geography and environmental studies and city planning maybe. It's not for me over in business or in economics or in health or social work or data science or civil engineering. And I beg to differ. I say, I believe it is relevant for all disciplines because everybody grapples with the whys of where. Picture the supply chain, right? Before 2 years ago, not very many people, geographers, business people, and others would talk about supply chain, but now it's kind of in the common vernacular because people are confronted with, hey, I can't just have anything anytime I want anymore. I got to think about that. Ooh, and what disrupts the supply chain and so on. Yeah, so I think that it's an amazing time, but these are 5 forces that bring us to a key moment in society. I wish I could get excited about this, Lori. Anyway, the point is, let's take that central one. Geotechnologies in the cloud is a huge leap forward. Remember when I was talking about in the past when it was desktop only geotechnologies, which includes geographic information systems, remote sensing, looking at the world from space, or small satellites, aircraft, or UAVs or drones. We can talk about your UAV drone program. GPS, or more broadly, global navigation satellite systems, web mapping, all these are part of the geotechnologies, sometimes referred to as geomatics or geotech or even geomedia. But the point is, geotechnologies having migrated or evolved into this cloud-based platform is a huge leap forward for, I think, 3 reasons. The reasons why is because, isn't it great that you have your music in the cloud? You might have some on your own device, but being able to access ABBA's greatest hits in the cloud, ABBA was a band. Anyway, the point is great, isn't it? You can access it anytime, anywhere. Now, what services do you use? Apple Music, Amazon Music. You've got, I don't know, Spotify, Pandora, whatever. Okay, you've got this music library of yours in the cloud. You don't really care what server it's on as long as you can access it anytime, anywhere on any device, correct? Same thing with you're collaborating with a colleague, a coworker, a fellow student, you faculty out there, fellow professors, and you're working on a article for a journal or something like that, or a term paper for your university. You're collaborating. You put it in OneDrive or Dropbox or Box.com or Google Drive or whatever, right? As long as you can access it, that's good. And you can collaborate, have multiple editors at the same time. As wonderful as it is to have your music and these documents in the cloud, I just submit to you all that it's even better to have geotechnologies in the cloud because of all those reasons we talked about earlier, all those key issues that we talked about earlier. These are not just going to be one single discipline of people solving these problems. It's going to take a community of people weighing in on these problems to solve them. And so being able to share methods and data and results and through communication, through web mapping applications and others, that's exactly what we need to be able to grapple with these. It's becoming a system of systems is what it is. So geotechnologies advented into the cloud. Now we still have desktop tools, but those desktop tools like ArcGIS Pro are actually connected to a cloud-based environment to give you more power and the ability to share. So even our desktop offerings are not just standalone offerings like they were in the past. That has huge implications because of 3 things, I believe. First of all, these problems and issues that I talked about earlier, they do not stop at physical boundaries, right? They don't stop at a watershed boundary or an ecoregion boundary or a river boundary or a mountain ridge or something like that. They transcend physical boundaries, correct? They also transcend political boundaries. They're not just Dallas County, Tarrant County, my county, Denver County, etc. My state, your state, they transcend all political boundaries, national boundaries as well. They transcend all those things, right? And thirdly, and perhaps even most importantly, they transcend disciplinary boundaries, as I touched on earlier. They're not just economics or geography or mathematics or history. They're all those disciplines and beyond. So it's important that we have geotechnologies in the cloud and that geotechnologies continues to evolve to help us to solve these problems. Geo-awareness in the upper left, more and more people are aware of the issues that you and I care about in other disciplines as well. So that's a good thing. I have never before in my career seen people so conversant in airport, lounges, airport hallways, buses, airport shuttles, where do I spend my time? Trails, coffee shops, and libraries, etc., talking about things that we've talked about today, right? It's the general public also talking about climate and health and so on, right? And so the awareness of the geo part is not always there, which takes a little bit of nudging from you and I, but the awareness is at an all-time high of these serious issues. And the enablement part, the geo enablement, everybody is enabled to use geotechnologies at least in some way, even people in your own circle of friends and family, right? People have a fitness app, right? You probably have a fitness app. You're recording your walks, your runs, your cycle rides, etc. Okay? Or you use Google Maps to find your way across campus or to your grandmother's house, whatever, right? So people are empowered, they're enabled to use at least some of these tools. They use a satellite image to look at, I don't know, changes over space and time in their neighborhood with the ESRI wayback imagery, a great way of looking at coastal erosion, changes in my neighborhood, built new buildings, etc. And citizen science up there in the upper right is another big trend that's now coming to fruition with, it's been around since the 1800s, right? With the bird community and others, birth of the Audubon Society and so on. But now we've got people mapping data and then collecting data and then mapping it and seeing their results on the map to maybe engage in their community as never before. So for example, I've got a recent post on, hey, my community, probably like yours and many others, has a community input. And this particular one was about trails. Now being a biker and a walker, I submitted, hey, there's a couple of trails that I frequent that are some, there's some serious route issues. And so the pavement is very kind of dangerous, especially if you're on a bicycle. And 2 days later, my community came out, hey, we responded to your post, and I've started to see some white lines around where they were going to repave, and they did. That's an example of citizen science in action. Another one that's even more important, much more important than my little example, is what I call a modern GIS example. So back in the fall, some hikers and beach walkers in Southern California were noticing some oil out in the water. And as you know, when there's a suspected oil spill, in this case it came from an old pipeline, time is of the essence before it gets onto shore and before it can destroy habitat and so on and so forth. So Surfrider created an app where people could, not just surfers, but others in that area, could submit points to the app, and then that was relayed to the emergency services, to EPA and others to contain that oil as soon as possible. So they got like 10,000 points in a few days. So citizen science in action, making a difference in the community. That's pretty powerful. And it would not be possible without the geotechnologies in the cloud, right? If it was just desktop only, again, we wouldn't have these field surveys, these web mapping applications, and the ability to communicate that the survey was available and also the results. And finally, storytelling with maps. This whole story right here is something I'll put in the chat box, but this is a story map. This whole thing that I'm speaking from right now. It's a story map, right? I've got embedded maps in it. I've got a lot more than we'll have actually time to show. But the point is, I still use Prezi, PowerPoint, video, etc. I mentioned my 5,000 videos earlier, but I also use story maps when they're appropriate, and oftentimes they are, to tell a story with a spatial perspective. And I encourage you to do the same thing. And other people have. There are over 3 million story maps, 3 million story maps in existence. Story maps have been around since 2010. It's part of the ArcGIS platform, along with dashboards and so on. Dashboards are another example of storytelling with visualization tools. Everybody has seen the JHU COVID dashboard. Why? Because it's very useful. People would decide, okay, does my community have a mask mandate? Can I go to the public library, et cetera, right? So the JHU COVID dashboard has been viewed in the T trillions since it came around back in February of 2020. It's a one screen application with tabs so you can look at different scales, but it's incredibly useful, and it has been. So that's just one of thousands of dashboards that people have set up on a whole wide variety of topics, and I'll explain what some of those topics are. So why use GIS for learning, teaching, and research? I've summarized these in the last few moments, but all the 21st century problems that we're confronting are spatial. Digital interactive maps are becoming what's sort of like the language of the planet. Those aren't my words. I wish they were, but I have adopted them, and they're from Jack Dangerman, our ESRI president, where he views GIS as sort of a nervous system of the planet also. Just like your body has a nervous system, right? It manages all of our vital organs. Without our central nervous system, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right, folks? So GIS is acting like the nervous system of the planet, or the language of the planet, if you will. Where, okay, what did you have to eat yesterday? How did that food get delivered to wherever you picked it up? What's powering your computer right now? The electric companies using GIS to manage all the utility lines, et cetera, right? The transportation that you took, the bus lines, the mass transit, your car. I mean, all that stuff is managed through GIS. It's sort of like, in my way of thinking about it, it's sort of like an elevator. You go into an elevator, you punch a bunch of buttons, and you just expect it to work, right, folks? It's sort of acting behind the scenes. You don't think about the technology behind it. GIS is kind of like that. It enables modern societies to function. And so it's important, but it's oftentimes not thought about. So geotechnologies is the challenge is in teaching and learning is, picture this. If you've got a cylinder of, let's say you drill into the soil. This is a physical geography example. The cobbles and boulders that you're going to find are the disciplines that people understand. Biology, chemistry, mathematics, et cetera. People at least have a grasp of at least what some of those are about. But the geotechnologies and the spatial thinking are like the sand or the soil between and what binds all the cobbles and boulders together. It's hard to grasp. It sifts through your fingers. You know what I mean? So the geotechnologies is, how do I put it in the curriculum? Where do I put it in the curriculum? How do I teach with it? How do students learn with it? What are they learning with it? And this is the subject of the essay that Lori very kindly mentioned at the beginning, where I have in here in this essay why and how to teach with geotechnologies. So I'm going to scoot these little controls around if I can. Maybe I can. I got to move this down. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to mention, what are the 10 most important skills, benefits, and strategies of teaching with GIS? I'm going to put this in the chat box here as well, because this isn't the end all be all. It's certainly not pearls of wisdom. But what I tried to do in here was, and this is part of the ESRI community where a lot of people post technical questions, but also pedagogical questions. We have our own education zone in that ESRI community. But the 10 most important skills, the 10 most important benefits, and the 10 key strategies for teaching and learning with GIS. And these go beyond, as I mentioned earlier, the tools are they're just tools. And they're important to learn how to do things in a GIS, but these are the most important, higher and more noble goals, if you know what I mean. The idea here is students are critically thinking about problems. They're problem solving. They're asking good questions. They're dealing with all kinds of data. They're working as teams, sometimes individually. They're working in the field, and some in the lab, some in their home offices. So there's multiple learning environments, but lots of different advantages to teaching and learning with GIS that I hope that essay is going to be helpful. First of all, you're not in this alone. You folks at Dallas College and maybe some other institutions that are represented here today, there is a good network, especially in North Texas, of educators that truly believe what you and I believe about this. So I can help connect you with others, but some of my educational heroes, Jerry Bartz, Scott Sayers, Lori Dela Cruz. I mean, there's some pillars of geoeducation in your area. So I encourage you to network with those folks, and don't feel like you're going to be out sailing on your own sailboat in the middle of the sea of unknown. Okay, you're in this with other good folks. Another thing that I wanted to mention here is that GIS is very firmly anchored in science. It's the science of where, really, is what the way that we like to think about it. It touches many disciplines. It brings strength to those other disciplines, and it's not just a set of software. Okay, it is a platform, and it's also relevant to many, many disciplines. A platform that people can build on. So, for example, if you students out there learn a little bit of coding, you can help build the tools of the future, but also build on the existing platform. You can also use configurable tools that are out of the box. But if you know a little bit of scripting, you can build from simple, what we call arcade expressions. Most things in ESRI GIS land start with arc something. And there's a geeky history behind that I could share if you'd like me to. But ArcGIS is our GIS brand, if you will. But Arcade is a scripting language that you can use to create pop-ups in your maps, to classify data in your maps, create bivariate, multivariate maps, to symbolize your maps in certain ways, to filter your maps, building those simple expressions all the way from there to using Jupyter notebooks. So using Python and creating analyses and final maps in the Python environment, but plugged into ArcGIS Online and also into ArcGIS Pro. So no libraries to install or anything, just plugs right in. So GIS is very firmly anchored in science. We are very much a part of the conversations around climate science and hydrology, biology, anthropology, literally from A to Z, archaeology to zoology and everything in between, really, truly. So that's good to know. I also wanted to encourage your students a couple things. First of all, we've got internships. You have to apply the autumn before the summer, the following summer. So you have to plan ahead. But we have two kinds of internships. We have a summer internship that's maybe 2.5 months long. Most of them are at our headquarters in Redlands for a key reason. We want you to have the experience of being on our campus, interacting with lots of different people on our campus, lots of different groups on campus. And our campus is very much like your college campus. It is Jack Dangerman, our founder, is a landscape architect, so it's very much like Dallas College campuses with nice trees and rocks and fitness center and all kinds of good stuff. They're a cafe. So it's not like corporate America at all. It is not that those headquarters are bad, but it is very much like a university sort of setting. Also, we have conference interns that work at our ESRI user conference every July in San Diego. We're having fingers crossed that we're going to actually meet in San Diego again this year, as we have for about 40 years or so. Well, actually, it wasn't in San Diego all that time, but 25 years in San Diego. And we're hopeful that we can be back there this summer. So we also have students that work at the conference, networking with people from all over the world. And that's a nice experience, I think. I've gotten a lot of good feedback from students. But we also have regular jobs. We have openings all the time. And the interesting thing, and I think the pertinent thing about our discussion today, is that GIS has never contracted. It has always been expanding. People always need these tools and these capabilities. So in our organization, we've never actually laid off anyone, which is, I think, pretty rare for a software company. We're a pretty old software company too, so we've experienced ups and downs in the economy and in society. So since 1969, we've been around. So we're older than Apple, we're older than Google, we're older than Microsoft. And I think the reason why is because we're doing what people are asking us to do. People are asking us, hey, we need this tool for my job in the city planning department, or in my job in the hydrology field, or more recently in social science. GIS was criticized in the past, and I think for right reasons, rightly so, because it was too quantitative. It's still got a big quantitative part of it, but more and more you can incorporate qualitative data into your GIS analysis. But again, thinking about the focus of today, this whole idea of the advantages I mentioned earlier, but also thinking about this. I encourage you students, and also you faculties teaching this, don't lose sight of the holistic view. All these problems and issues that I identified earlier, we're going to need people that look at things holistically. Yes, it's good that you specialized. If soil science is your thing, or transportation, or crime, criminal justice, whatever. Focus on those things, that's fine, but don't forget the holistic view. And that's what the geographic perspective, the spatial perspective has always brought value-wise to problems, is that holistic view. Holistic thinkers in this realm also, I would submit to you all, think about systems. So, and cycles, the hydrologic cycle, the carbon cycle, etc. And also spheres. The anthrosphere, the human sphere, is connected to the biosphere, is connected to the lithosphere, the rocks, right? Is connected to the cryosphere, the ice, is connected to the atmosphere, right? So the impact of one variable could impact lots of different spheres, that holistic view, patterns, relationships, and trends. That is the idea here. And I explain that more in one of the books I wrote about geographic discoveries. But it really touches on this geographic inquiry process that we talked about earlier. Asking good questions, gathering data, analyzing, and then, again, encouraging people to act on, and that leads to additional questions. So that brings me to, I'm going to skip down, time being of the essence here, to 5 skills that I think are important for you to move forward in your own use of geotechnologies, and that is, first and foremost, asking good questions. Okay, here we go. Being curious about the world, I think, is the most important skill for you students to develop. And I encourage you faculty to do all you can so that students are not intimidated by asking questions. You know, oftentimes we don't teach that in schools and in universities, but I just encourage us all to do that, because except for, you know, asking students questions on tests, we want to go far beyond that. I really want them to ask good questions, get into the habit of, you students out there, ask questions that your professor's not even asking you to ask. And when you get into the workplace, ask questions that your employer is not even asking you to ask. Ooh, those are the kinds of employees that we want, and our business partners at ESRI want, and others, government, private, nonprofit, academia. Those are the valued kind of employees, the people that can ask, why are we doing it like this? Let's think about ... and so on. And that leads to tenacity. Asking good questions leads to tenacity, solving problems. Secondly, being able to work with data and being critical of it. I can't emphasize this enough. It is so grand that we've got this kind of thing at our fingertips. We've got, oh, the California fire perimeters in ArcGIS Online. Okay, that's fascinating. And what if we added, how about, browse layers, and I'm in ArcGIS Online, I've got all this stuff at my fingertips, and I can say, well, gosh, what do we have here? We have, for example, how about popular demographics? Okay, so I can get to ACS data, 2020 census data, other data in here. And I can add, okay, what's the population like where these fire perimeters have been occurring for the last 60 years in California, or of course, Texas, any other part of the world you want to mention. So I can look at, okay, popular demographics. And if I can add that to this map, and I can say, okay, what kind of variable do I want to map? Okay, wow, I've got a lot of data at my fingertips here. I've got the G part of GIS, I've got the I part of GIS, I've got the S part of GIS, all working together to give me attribute data, and also, now I've got, looks like, what do I have here? Gosh, okay, I've got a lot of data at my fingertips. I've got, in this case, the layers, popular demographics. What if I expanded that? Right now I'm looking at the zip code level. Okay, let's stay at the zip code level. Okay, well, what kind of information might we want to map here at this level? Okay, well, let's go ahead and change that. Let's say, gosh, I've got some information at my fingertips, but can I trust it? How do I know where it came from? So I'm going to look at the metadata behind every one of these layers. Even though we have 2 layers here that are very interesting and fascinating, where does it come from? How often is it updated? What scale was it created at? So I encourage you 2 things. Look at the metadata and then decide whether it's suitable for your project or not. Not just grab data, and then I come up behind you and I say, hey, where did all that data come from? And you turn to me and say, I don't know, Joseph. That's not a very good answer, okay? You need to understand where your data came from, because remember, you've got cloud-based services at your fingertips. What does that mean, Joseph? Well, that means, for example, that you have, you've got a lot of information at your fingertips, but more is not always better. And furthermore, this is a completely open platform, okay? A completely open platform. So what does that mean? That means that, okay, that means that anyone is a map creator nowadays, right? You, I, others, you can create content in here. Okay, well, that's interesting. Well, what does that mean? That means that in the past, USGS, Census Bureau, those organizations I worked for, NOAA, but also Texas DNR, the Texas Government, the General Land Office, TNRIS, the Texas Natural Resources Information System, DFW, City Planning, Metroplex Planning, they created content. Nowadays, you and I can create content for this platform. So that means it's a completely open platform. So I'm going to sign in now so I can change the symbology here. I'm going to sign into ArcGIS Online. But folks, that has huge implications, right? Having the ability to post data into the platform. In other words, there's nobody at ESRI saying, hey, Joseph, you can't put that content there, or hey, Lori, you can't put that content there. No, it's a completely open platform. So that means you've got middle school students all the way to, your family members and you and everybody else. Millions of content items go in here daily, okay, daily. So the point is, you've got a lot of data at your fingertips, but you have the ability to say, oh, because of the wide variety of data there, I've got good stuff. I've got stuff that looks good, but it's not very well populated with metadata. So I've got a lot of content, but I don't know if I can trust it all. So the point of this discussion is be critical of the data. So I have a data blog, which I know sounds really boring, but it's all about three things. Where can I find spatial data, like the California fire perimeters and the demographic data, Joseph, that you were starting to show? Where can I find data? So that's one point of this spatial reserves data blog. Came out of a book that a colleague and I wrote for ESRI Press, because we wanted to keep that conversation going. After the book came out, we kept the conversation going with these series, weekly, short, digestible, especially for you faculty members and you students out there, short readings with videos sometimes and short activities sometimes that keep the conversation going about where do I find data? How do I know if it's any good? Can I trust it? And thirdly, as you saw on that last screen that I had up, societal issues, location privacy, copyright, ethics, and so on, okay? There are lots of societal issues around spatial data. It's very personal, right? Where you and I move and shop and frequent the library or a concert hall or go hiking. It's that kind of information is highly desired by lots of different groups out there. And so when do you share? When do you not share? That alone is a huge issue. So anyway, the point is that this whole spatial reserves data blog has to do with those three things. And so I encourage you to cultivate the idea of being critical of the data, because again, this is an open platform. Anybody can contribute to it. And there is a subset of ArcGIS Online called the Living Atlas of the World. The Living Atlas of the World is 8,500 data layers, 8,500 data layers, and wildfires, biomes, population, consumer behavior, demographic information, natural hazards, current weather, current stream flow down the street from Dallas College, etc. 8,500 data layers. Does this mean that these 8,500, Joseph, are all perfect and I don't need to worry about data quality? No. Remember, we're still trying to model imperfectly, but doing our best to trying to model the Earth in all of its complexities and dynamism changes. And so even those data sets in the Living Atlas from authoritative sources still have map quality guidelines. They still have national map or state map accuracy standards. So there are data quality issues even in this set, but at least this set is well populated with metadata. So you know where it came from and how often it's updated and what scale was it created at and all that kind of stuff. I never metadata I didn't like. Ooh, that was a bad geo pun. But the point is, even this, you need to have a critical eye on, but at least it's a good source to start from in this mindset of being critical of the data. I think that's the second most important skill. Also, know your geotechnical and geographic foundations. Now, I just would argue with you all today that a few people on campus, a subset of students and faculty need to know a lot about geotechnologies because they're going to be the software developers, the coders, the people that actually advance GI science. And then there's others that need to know some about geotechnologies because they're going to be using this to do teaching or research or maybe even on the campus facility side to manage the campus, all the infrastructure, the water lines, the fiber optic cable, where all the electrical outlets are, food service delivery around campus, et cetera, campus security, campus safety, et cetera. Okay, so on that campus facilities side. And there are others, I would argue everyone should know at least a little bit about geotechnologies, even those business students, even those students over in data science or civil engineering, et cetera, because they're going to be asked, hey, can you develop a mapping app that does this? Okay, yeah, I could do that. I learned how to do that at Dallas College. Great. Okay, here's the assignment. Go do that. Great. If you know how to do some of those things, again, you're going to be very valuable to your organization. But the geotechnical foundations are back on what I believe that some people need to know on campus, the things that we talked about. But also I would just, again, say that if you're making maps in a GIS, whether it's ArcGIS Pro or ArcGIS Online or Business Analyst Web or any other tool, you can't just blindly create maps, classify them, symbolize them, because maps are very powerful tools. So I would just beg of you to treat them with respect. So when you're symbolizing, when you're classifying, how you do that, and much more we could talk about, affects how your end user is going to perceive the data that you're presenting, whether it's about population change or water quality or invasive species or whatever. So you want to be knowledgeable about what are the best ways to do this so that people understand, and so I'm accurately reflecting what the issue is. I'm not misrepresenting the data. So with a lot of capability, you've got a lot of responsibility too, okay? Not to make you overly nervous about this, but a lot of people don't think about that where they've got all these capabilities at their fingertips and I'm just gonna click, 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 and then I'm gonna, oh, I've got a web map. Oh, I'm gonna share it. I've got a web map or a story map or an infographic or something, and I don't really understand everything there is to know about that particular issue or how to symbolize, but I'm gonna share it with everyone, okay? That would to me is thoughtlessly. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like sleepwalking in my, oh, I'm bumping into things. Okay, I know that's a dresser. That's a book. That's my computer monitor. You see what I mean? So be thoughtful about when you're working with these tools. And then be adaptable. I know many of you are from international backgrounds, and I salute you. For those of you that have not had any sort of international experience, I would just encourage you to pursue those. Some of the most valuable parts of my own career path have been when I've taught in Taiwan, in East Africa, in the UAE, in Australia, etc. Good on you, mates. She'll be right. Anyway, the point is pursue those opportunities. If you don't have those opportunities, then I would just encourage you at a conference, virtual or face-to-face, go to a track that is completely outside of your own wheelhouse. You know what I mean? So at a recent geography conference, I went to a social work track. I met some new people. I learned about their methods. You know, it was a stretch for me. So I encourage you to do the same. Also, despite the trends that I talked about, well, the forces that I talked about, geo-awareness, storytelling, citizen science, geo-enablement, et cetera, I still think it's important for you to have your elevator speech because someone is going to come down to your cubicle or ping you on Teams or something like that and say, hey, you need to present to the CEO, to the board of directors, to the city manager, to your patrons, to your constituents, whoever, about your position and why it matters and why we need to fund you for another year in that position. this is still a bit of an unknown quantity or territory in many people's minds. Oh, well, what do you mean? Why do we need you in our organization? I've got Google Maps on my phone. Why do I need you as a GIS analyst or someone with geotechnologies in your tool belt? And speaking of which, you probably won't be GIS analyst or GIS technician or GIS manager. There are very few people with that in their title. I'm thinking about over the course of my career, I've been geographer, cartographer, education manager, instructor. I've never had GIS in my title, and very few people do. That's okay. That shows how GIS is a skill set and a perspective in many different disciplines. So you'll be city planner, or you'll be purchaser for Wendy's or something. I mean, you'll be supply chain for Amazon. Who knows? But in your role, geotechnologies is going to be important. So have that elevator speech because there are going to be people that don't understand what all this is. They think maps are reference documents, and maps are actually analytical tools, right? Analytical tools. They help people understand things. So one very simple example is this story map that I and a colleague made on the Lakota language. So we had two objectives here. One, to show that, hey, story maps are viable tools. So we have the English word and the Lakota word for different landforms.
Lake, bleh.
So in case you couldn't hear that, lake, bleh. So I've got an audio recording in there, obviously, of my colleague saying river, wakpa.
River, wakpa.
The point are two. Number one, that story maps can incorporate lots of different elements. And so we wanted to encourage people to use these as tools to help students understand landforms, in this case, geomorphology, rivers, lakes, etc., hills, and human modification, so the human-environment interaction. But secondly, and more importantly, the bigger, higher, more noble goal was to call attention to endangered indigenous languages, which Lakota shares with thousands of other languages around the world that are endangered, right? The average age of speaking them is 60 plus. And so what happens if that language isn't taught to the younger people? What's going to happen to that language? So we were drawing attention to a bigger issue here and using story maps to do that. And on a technical note, if we can do this with one word at a time here, so much more you could do with tribal elders, right? Or others with whole blocks of audio. So there are two goals here. And so it's an illustration for what you can do with these tools. And I truly believe, folks, that this decade is going to be exciting for geotechnologies. Yes, we have a lot of serious issues on our planet. Don't want to sugarcoat those in any way. We've got to solve these things to build this more resilient future. But we've got good people like you all listening to this. The Lori and Jerry and Scott and other leaders in your community, in your region. And we are here to support you. And I truly believe that you students are going to be the change agents. You're going to be the ones making these wiser, smarter decisions with geotechnologies on your tool belt to build this happier, healthier, more sustainable world. Questions, comments, issues? And while you're thinking about that, this is a picture I took in a southwestern corner of a certain state north of you. Think about, what do I know about, I'm spatially thinking now, what do I know about the southwesternmost corner in the states north of Texas? So it's one of those states. Maybe you can identify which one it was. Questions, comments? Lori, how are you doing? Is everybody asleep over there? I just wanted to make sure you folks are okay. Give me a thumbs up or something in the chat box here.
Oh my gosh, that was so exciting. And I have lots and lots of questions, but one of our guests, Amber, had her hand raised. Amber, did you want to ask a question?
Sure. I'm really interested. You talked about all of these data sources and different aspects of data quality, and I'm particularly interested in how you help students evaluate that data quality.
Right. Well, one of the things that I say is, as I mentioned a while back, I have in that spatial reserves book and blog, guidelines for evaluating data quality. Sometimes they're I've got a couple of infographics in here and other ways that students can, and faculty as well. Okay, how do I determine whether that data is suitable for my project? I think all of us are a bit of a data geek in some ways, right? We want, oh, more data. That's great. And in this environment, you've got data that you've created. You've got data that other colleagues have created. You also have data that people you don't even know have created, organizations, but also individuals that are hosting data in this same platform. So yeah, evaluating that is, I try to make it doable and not onerous, but I do think it's important. And I do have some infographics about step one. What data do I need for my project? What scale do I need? What is the temporal component that I need? Do I need it to be updated right now? Is it time is of the essence? I need the stream gauges right now or the wildfire perimeter, or is a day, a week, a month, a year old okay? And if so, so continuing down that sort of a branching of key decision points to make at each step of the process. But the overriding one, though, is have a vision for what data will suit your needs, because otherwise it tends to be a sort of a, doing what I did earlier with adding data to ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Pro, and there's just, earthquakes alone, tornadoes in Texas. I mean, there's 50 sources for every single theme that you want, or more, for every single theme that you add. So which one of those is actually suitable for my project? And also getting them to think about that more is not always better. It's the focused, it's sort of like you're advising them on their master's thesis, right? It's like, hey, you gotta make it doable. You gotta make it confined, not to be saying that you shouldn't be curious and shouldn't browse data from time to time, but have a clear goal. And I do have some of those things in here, but that's a very good question. I mean, even this water balance one that I was pulling up as you were starting, this is one of the Living Atlas apps. So in this case, the spacing is like a 10-kilometer spacing. It doesn't mean it's not useful just because it's not super high resolution, but you've got 6 variables here with precipitation being one of them. So if I click in Brazil, as I did, it's not a summer and winter, right? It's a wet season and a dry season. And also the data is about 3 months old. Right now it's January, next month we'll have the February data in there. But you can see the wet season and the dry season, and also getting them to, think about, okay, what is the x-axis? What's the y-axis? And how does that compare to my own area, or maybe southern Libya? I click in there and I'm going to have whole months of the year. My hypothesis is the whole months of the year without any precipitation at all, and which is true. It's borne out by the data. Where does the data come from? How is it aggregated into these cells? So those are the underlying things, and that's where we encourage students, okay, look at the metadata here. But it's fascinating to be able to do this. And also, south of you all, right? If I click in there, my hypothesis is going to be I'm going to have some big spikes in certain months of the year. And I do. I've got a big spike here, August, September. Why is that? You got those big tropical storms that roar through there every once in a while, right? Causing these huge spikes when there's a hurricane or a tropical storm down in Southeast Texas. Anyway, so even these applications, just because the data is fairly coarse and it's a global scale, doesn't mean it's not useful. So you don't always need sub-centimeter or meter spatial resolution for a project. But anyway, very good things that you're bringing up.
Thank you very much. The article that you showed earlier from your spatial reserves on the geoethics, there was a link in there that led to another website. I think it was in Pennsylvania, and there was a lot of case studies in there.
Yes.
On the ethics of using certain data or tracking certain people for different reasons. And those could be really powerful tools in the classroom to go through those case studies.
Exactly. That's why I reviewed that recently, and I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's sort of like role playing. You can incorporate some of those things into teaching. It means a lot more than, okay, we're going to study ethics now. There's I think lots of ways to do that in ways that students will remember. These are real world situations. I mean, maybe not exactly that scenario, but something like it has happened in numerous cases all over the world. And just being able to, look at urban sprawl or or we've got these tools at our fingertips, right? You've got the Wayback Imagery here. You've literally got petabytes of data, and I can see that, oh, in 2014 on the left side here, and I got 2021 on the right side, and I've got a couple things that I wanted to share here, and that is, okay, I've got urban sprawl, and I've got lots of urbanization just in 7-year span. I had a vacant lot here, it was probably full of cholla and rattlesnakes. Now I've got a big IKEA there. What's where, why is it there, and why should we care? Those are the 3 guiding questions. So what? So what if there's urban sprawl? Okay, well, if this is an arid area, and of course this is Las Vegas, as probably some of you have guessed, and I've got this situation where, now if I pan over to the east and I see a dramatic decline in a reservoir like Lake Mead, and if my urban area is getting a lot of water for municipal, industrial, residential, commercial use, from a body of water, and if that body of water is declining, what's going to happen in the future, and how can I prepare for it, and what do I need to do now so that this city can be viable, and many other cities like it in the world, right? This is one of the UN SDGs, but water quality and quantity. But just at one glance, that's why mapping tools are so powerful. People understand, oh, that's a serious issue. Nothing against writing an article about it, right? But this, at one glance, you see the situation: urban sprawl and declines in surface water in 7 years. And then another nice thing about these tools on a technical level is I can do this kind of thing in an intro to a urbanization class, or a class on glaciation. I can pan up to Alaska and look at glacial change over X years. I can look at coastal erosion. I could look at agricultural expansion in Saudi Arabia or in the central USA. And again, thinking about what's where, why is it there, and why should we care? I can teach a lot of topics with this, but if I want to dig deeper, all these tools have a sort of a level 1 and a level 2. The level 1 with the water balance was looking at this app and looking at these graphs, but level 2 is, notice in the lower left, download the water balance data into a CSV, a comma separated value. Then you can bring it into Excel. You could bring it into ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Pro for further analysis. You could bring it into the R statistics package. You could do some further analysis on it. Level 2 with this, the Wayback Imagery, is, okay, if I was signed in to ArcGIS Online, which of course you folks have access to, I could say, ooh, now I want to bring these images into ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Pro, and then I could overlay other things on it: population density, land use, precipitation rates over the last X decades, etc. Right? So I've got additional capabilities at my fingertips. So level 1, just using these web mapping applications as someone has created. And also, I think the message is too, for you students and faculty, you can create your own web mapping applications. You're not just consuming ones that other people have created. You can create your own. So it's very empowering. We're not just talking about population or climate or other issues, city planning, zoning. You're actually creating the same kinds of tools that people in the workplace are creating. So there's that level 2 aspect to it as well. Maps have always been appealing. They convey a large amount of information in a small amount of space, right? In the past, it was on clay tablets, wood blocks, on Al-Idrisi's map of silver from the 1100s, and then up until, the 20th century, starting in the 20th century, on copper plates, film, so we could reproduce them onto paper, and then more recently in digital form. And I think that's exciting.
I love the swipe tool. I use it all the time because, yeah, it shows those, this is what it looked like, just 10 years ago or 14 years ago. And and it's really amazing how much development we've had here in DFW just in the last few years. Of course, anybody who's tried to buy a house around here will know that.
Oh, I've been there many times. I totally understand. Yes.
But Dr. Otterak had a question.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Kerski. Thank you so much for this presentation. I just wanted to, at the beginning of this presentation, you said that ESRI had been criticized for being so quantitative, and that now it has developed software, I suspect, for qualitative analysis. Could you provide us some examples besides the Lakota? I think that would be one, the Lakota language tracing.
Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the I would start here. I would start with this qualitative, so well, first of all, GIS was criticized as being too quantitative, positivistic in the worldview, because that was the driving force for GIS. It was, I want to plan, X amount of parcels in my city to be commercial. I want to figure out what water quality in my community has a dissolved oxygen of X or less. You know what I mean? It was all driven by questions like that. Nowadays, there's certainly a lot of that there, but beginning with John Pickles' Ground Truth book in 1995, where Pickles and other academics said, hey, GIS is too positivistic in its worldview, and we need tools that will allow social scientists and others to use it. Now, it took a while before the technology was there, but just in the last few years with the advent of the web, I think is changing that. And so if you start, and I'll put this in the chat box as well, with this, it's a story map, but it's about ways that you and others can engage with social science, sociology, and other fields, and how do we do that in a GIS? And it's got some examples in it, and one of my colleagues put this together, some layers you can actually start digging into. There's no shortage of some fascinating data. So for example, in Business Analyst Web, which you also have access to, it's one of our business-focused web mapping applications, but it's also useful not just for citing the best location for a cafe or a library or a skateboard shop or something like that. It's actually valuable to look at. This is what you and I love, right? Is looking at these behavioral variables. That is actually part of Business Analyst Web. So it's who buys lottery tickets, who drinks coffee, who bicycles to work, who has donated to an arts institution like an arts organization over the last year, who's donated to an environmental cause. All these kinds of things are in there. And I like to ask students, hey, that's not census data. Where does that stuff come from? And usually circles around to, we buy that data. ESRI buys that data from people that gather it from credit card companies, right? So it's all aggregated. You can't see what I spent money on or you or others, but it's extremely fascinating to dig into some of these behavioral, health, and other variables. And so that's one thing you can do. But I would just start with this social science page, and this is probably the start of many additional resources in this area. Just as another example, I'm in education, and so most of my examples are from education. But I was working with some students and faculty at New Mexico State, just over to the west of you a ways. Last year, they had a grant it was basically a storytelling kind of a grant, and most of the people involved in that project were, I was encouraging you to do the same thing, right? Go outside of your wheelhouse. One of the reasons why I said yes, that I would be an advisor to this and conduct some workshops for them, is that most of the people in that project were MFAs. They were Masters of Fine Arts students and faculty. And, that's not a typical group that I usually work with, but there were some fascinating things that we could kind of explore common ground. And I loved what they were, bringing to the table, in terms of how they approached community, storytelling, etc. So anyway, great that we're having this conversation, folks.
Yes. And thanks so much, Dr. Kerski. And one of our students had a question. Susan, did you want to ask?
Yes. So I was wondering if you would suggest using GIS for like small spaces. Like
Yes.
small spaces as in like a park small, just one small park.
Yep, you're touching on something that is actually in that story map that I shared earlier, that I started with and I ended with. I kind of diverged from time to time because I wanted to make this really suitable and meaningful for what Lori and I have been discussing. But one of the things in there is I have this section on 5 key trends in GIS, and you're touching on a key one. Well, actually several, but let's take number 2, building information management, computer-aided drafting and design, and architecture, engineering, and construction. In the past, it was sort of like the people mapping interior spaces, including what's inside a park. You could consider that a relatively, tight space like you're saying. But university campus buildings, hospitals, libraries, etc., commercial spaces. The people mapping those interior spaces and the people mapping the exterior spaces were almost like, one group was speaking Spanish and one group was speaking Portuguese. We understood a few things in common, like bom dia, oh, okay, buenos dias. I kind of understand, we're sort of, that, okay. But there were other things that we didn't understand. And so that was how the CAD BIM community and the GIS community were. The GIS community was always about external space mapping, ecoregions, census tracts, biomes, river systems, and so on. And the interior space mapping were all about using CAD and BIM to map the interior spaces, all of the electrical outlets, the doors, the access, etc. Now, why does this matter that now we've got this, not convergence, but at least the communities have some common tools, like ArcGIS Urban is a manifestation of the two communities coming together, where you've got CAD and GIS tools in the same thing called ArcGIS Urban. Another one's called ArcGIS Indoors. As the name implies, it's a touching of these. Well, part of it was that Jack Dangerman, our ESRI president, and the Autodesk CEO got together some years back, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and said, we really need to be working together. It's not good for these communities to be totally, no interoperability. It's very difficult to get data from one to the other. And why does that matter? Remember the what's where, why is it there, and why should we care? Well, if we're going to build a resiliency model for one of your campuses, I know you've got many campuses, your community, Arlington, Grapevine, Fort Worth, etc. If we're going to build these models, let's say your campus, let's focus on that. If there's a weather event at 3 p.m. on a Friday, okay, where are the students, where are the faculty, where are the emergency exits? We've got to have this integrated model where we have the interior spaces mapped with the exterior spaces, right? That's what we need to build this more resilient campus model. And so it's good that we've got these communities starting to talk with each other now and building some common tools that we can all share and use. So I think you're touching on something, if you know a little bit of that CAD BIM community tools and some of the GIS tools, you're going to be very, very much highly in demand in the future.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for being here. And another one that touches on what you're saying is 3D. And we've had 3D visualization for years. We really haven't had much 3D analysis until the last few years. I mean, that's exactly what we need, right? If we're going to build a building next to you're talking about a park, do we need to set that back by X distance so that the park will be in sunlight, let's say, much of the year and for many of the seasons of the year? So what are the offsets on buildings near the park, for example? How do we do that? We have to be able to analyze, and there's lots more examples, but we need to analyze in 3D, not just to visualize existing, but to analyze and project into the future if we did this in 3D. So we live in a 3D world, and it makes sense that we've got these 3D tools. Anybody else? I want to be sensitive to your time, and I know we've been chatting away here, and it's been a joy. But again, I don't want to. I know everybody's busy, and again, appreciate the attention, and let me know if there's anything I can do to be of any assistance to you going forward in the future in your own journey, because it is a journey. It's not something that you're going to learn in this one webinar, right? It's a journey. You've got some good courses there. You've got some very passionate instructors, certificate programs, and other things that you can take advantage of. And there are, of course, other resources out there outside of your university, like ESRI massive open online courses that you can take for free for 6 weeks. There's lots of resources to keep you moving forward.
We're just so excited. Just a few weeks ago in Dallas College, we launched single sign-on. So it is
sweet.
now available to every single person in Dallas College with a Dallas College email address. Kappa is talking about doing the same kind of thing for their students here at UTA. SMU's had single sign-on for a couple of years. So it's available, it's widely available. It's just how do we get the students and the faculty engaged and wrapping their heads around what a fabulous tool this is, not only for the classroom, but for these students as they graduate and go into the workforce, because GIS has become one of those careers that is embedded in so many other careers. And I tell students all the time, if you know enough to be dangerous, you are trainable. When you go into a job, you say, I have some experience doing GIS. That is going to put you higher up in that stack of resumes than somebody who doesn't have GIS experience.
Well said, indeed. I'm looking at the some of the chats here and responded to a few of them, but yeah, thanks, folks. Thanks for being here. Take a look at if you want to be looking at some of the trends. These are the other ones that I've got in here that you can see on the screen: artificial intelligence and machine learning, real-time data and analytics. There's some really, this is a really exciting time for geotechnologies. It really is. The challenge is, what tools do you want to use? What do you want to accomplish? In the past, it was you could learn all of, or at least most of, geotechnologies, from the gathering of the data to these other things. But now you've got capabilities, and I just encourage you as follows. Let me just close with this one. To join these tools together, again, be thoughtful about the tools that you want to use, but join these tools together for additional power. So here's a simple example. As a geographer, I'm really passionate about walkable neighborhoods. So in this case, I've got a story map about a walkable neighborhood. I ask people, is this place walkable or not? What about this place? You saw my picture earlier. What about this? These are all pictures I've taken on my various walks. Here I'm on a pier in Lake Michigan. Is that walkable? It depends on the lake level, etc. Here's probably the most famous intersection in the world. Probably some of you recognize it, Abbey Road. It's not very walkable, actually. There's a lot of traffic there. There's no stoplight. You have to have a significant other sort of making sure that you're not going to get run over when you take your Abbey Road photo. But so the story map is about walkability. That's one tool. The second tool I have in there is a survey 123, where I say, hey, I've got it crowdsourced. You could actually take my survey right now because I have it open until I decide to close it. I've got 5 questions in there. Walkable, not walkable, rate it, tick all the choices that describe it. Where is it located? Do you have a photograph? So 5 simple questions. But then I also have in here as you would probably suspect, a web map, right? With places all over the world that I and others have submitted points into, okay? And that survey feeds the web map. Okay, and the last thing I have in here is a dashboard. So the dashboard, just like the JHU COVID dashboard, in my case, the dashboard has one data feed from it, and that's my survey. So remember I was saying if you know a little bit of scripting with Arcade and some of these other tools, you can be a little more powerful. So here I've got some standard things that are just drag and drop in a dashboard, like this graph. Roughly 1/4 are deemed pedestrian unfriendly by the people filling them out. 3/4 are deemed pedestrian friendly. I've got 695 points in there that I and others have collected data into. But here in the lower right, I've got this top 3 months. So you can kind of visualize, okay, Joseph's doing some sort of a query on the data and filtering the data and then ranking the data on the top 3 months that people have filled out the survey. Same thing over here. I've got a ranking in the middle here and that's just maybe a 7-line Arcade script in there that pulls out the variable and then ranks those variables. And then I've got, of course, the live web map and a little bit of an image here and a legend. The green are pedestrian friendly and the hollow symbols are deemed unfriendly. But the points are 2. 1, I'm stitching together 4 different pieces of the platform: story map, ArcGIS Online map, survey, and dashboard. Okay, so if there's 4 pieces, so stitching them together gives you power. The second point in here is that we're not talking days, weeks, months, right, to configure some of these things. Each one of these components, each one of these 4 components took me about 2 class periods to create. So two class periods for the story map, 2 class periods for the survey, 2 for the dashboard, 2 for the actual web map. So in 8 class periods, so roughly 8 hours, I had this whole thing made. Okay, so we're, again, talking about tools that are very accessible, and it doesn't have to be walkability, right? It could be weather, it could be in community gardens, it could be graffiti, it could be urban greenway, whatever you're passionate about, right? So I hope that was helpful too. About this is a manifestation of modern web-based geotechnologies. I know Lori and I have talked about these tools quite extensively, and I just think being able to do this in a short amount of time is incredibly powerful.
It really and truly is. And I've actually created a hub that's like a tutorial on how to do the survey, adjust your map to make it readable, do a dashboard, and then share it in a story map. So yeah, it's a fabulous process. And that dashboard just continuously updates until you turn off the survey.
That's the beauty of these things, is that many of them, if they're tied to some sort of, could be a stream gauge, it could be weather feed, it could be a survey that you deploy, is automatically updating every time someone submits a survey into this. So exactly. And Lori mentioned ArcGIS Hub. That's another important part of this whole web-based process. So a couple of a while back, Mapping Hour, we started a Mapping Hour hub. Why? What's a hub site? It's a site to serve resources. Think of it as a geo-enabled web page, set of web pages actually. So we said, okay, people want to know how to build these tools when these students were sent home, from COVID. How do I keep my students engaged moving forward with these geotechnologies? So as the Mapping Hour name implies, my colleagues and I set up, okay, well, we've got resources and on different topics. So you can see here, week 1, we've got 5 days in week 1. Week 2, we've got 5 days. Each one of the days is really an hour. So how do I create a story map? How do I create a dashboard? How do I map field data? That kind of thing. So the best way for us to quickly serve up that data, kind of like what Lori's talking about, I'm going to set up a hub site. So the hub site is great for serving spatial data. Municipalities often use these to serve traffic, zoning, other information for your community. So they set up a hub site to do that oftentimes. But also, and probably even more importantly than serving data and resources like this, is the idea of a hub site is engagement. So you're engaging people in a conversation, you're building community. And many of these hub sites have ways remember I was talking about my own cycling example here in my own city in Colorado, submitting data to the community through an app and having them improve the cycling trails. Well, here, you're building community with whatever the issue around the hub site is. In this case, we wanted to build community because we don't want people to feel like, hey, I've got to teach all this stuff all by myself, and there's no network. So we wanted to build community here as well as just to serve the resources. But the hub site, just like dashboards, story maps, they're very configurable. What do you want over here? What do you want over here? Drag it over here. Sure, if you know a little coding, you can make it a little more powerful, but just out of the box, it's all just kind of drag and drop configuration on many of these tools, which again, make it so that you don't have to spend the rest of your life creating a hub site or the rest of the semester.
Such powerful tools right at our fingertips. It's really,
and Lori
really
is the hub guru. She is awesome at these.
I love them. I absolutely love them. Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Kerski. This has been so valuable, and I'm so glad that we were able to get 3 higher ed groups together to talk with you about this, and hopefully we will get a whole lot more questions, as we launch this throughout Dallas College. I'm building out a SharePoint site and a couple of hubs to get faculty, up and running with this, and we're going to be doing a little bit of that here at UTA also. But it's such valuable information, and it's so important that our faculty understand that this is such a great tool for collaboration, interdisciplinary collaboration. So it's really, bringing different classes together or doing a project across a lot of disciplines and analyzing that data as a team. Just so many opportunities. I'm really, really excited about the possibilities.
Well, I get a lot of inspiration working with innovative people like you, Lori, and others in your region. So let's keep the conversation going, and looking forward to further chats about all things geo.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Kerski. Take care.
You folks too. Take care. See you around.